Okay. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for this first episode of 2023 for Real Talk, Family Life, Building Shatterproof Families, One Brick at a Time. I hope that 2023 would bring you lots of love and joy and blessings and laughter and happiness. In this episode, we want to look at mental health and brain health post-COVID-19. While COVID might be our marker to start the program, we acknowledge that, COVID is simply a substitute for major trauma, something that might need our treatment, our attention towards prevention and care in the future. And so tonight, we really want to encourage you to take notes, use the chat feature if you're seeking clarity so that we offer any, so that we can address any questions, queries, or concerns that you would have. Tonight, joining us is a very good friend of mine, Dr. Janelle Chase Reyes. She's a mental health advocate. No, Janelle, it's not just a hi and get in. I have to introduce my friend. This lady is a mental health advocate. She's a consultant. She's a creative and systemic therapist. She's a CrossFit coach. She's a junior elite athlete, strength and physical conditioning coach. She is a sport administrator. She's a certified grief recovery specialist and all things integrated approach. It is a privilege to call her friend and coach when I need it, and counselor when I need it, and coach for my daughter who's an athlete. And I think what Janelle brings tonight is just a myriad of experiences, plus her professional training that will inform our discussion on mental health tonight. So before Janelle starts her introduction and presentation, I want to read something I found on the World Health Organization that will kind of perhaps give you an idea of what we will reference tonight, but we're looking at it towards preventative care. So I found an article that came out last year talking about what COVID-19 as a pandemic triggered worldwide in terms of the increase in anxiety and depression. And it said that in the first year of the COVID-19 pandemic, the global prevalence of anxiety and depression increased by 25%, according to a scientific brief by the World Health Organization, WHO. It highlights those who were most affected and summarizes the effect of the pandemic on the availability of mental health services and how that availability changed during the pandemic. Concerns about potential increases in mental health conditions have prompted approximately 90% of countries who reported to include mental health and psychosocial support in their COVID-19 response plans, but major gaps in terms of mental health generally remain. So we know that COVID-19 and its impact on mental health is just the tip of the iceberg, right? But I think according to the Director General of the World Health Organization, it is a wake-up call to all countries to pay more attention to mental health and to do a better job of supporting their population's mental health and not just to wait on a pandemic. So Janelle, I think that is a perfect segue into what you do and perhaps looking first and foremost at what is mental health. When we talk about mental health, what should we be talking about before we even get into diagnosing anxiety and depression?
So can you hear me well?
Yes.
So good night, everyone. If you could just turn on your camera and give me a good wave. I know you're so accustomed to Zoom and not being present on Zoom, but I love to see people's faces. I love to know that people are actually there, that it's not any AI or any chat boxes. And I think it also argues for a better interaction through the people who are participating as well too. So I see you, Maria, I see you, Derek, I see you, Pastor Anthony, and anybody else that wants to jump on in and spread a little love with your face, I will totally appreciate it. But thanks so much, Sasha, Dr. Sutherland. In reference to what it is that I do and how we can actually begin having this conversation. First of all, let me just say that I'm honored that I continue to be asked to have these conversations about mental health and mental health awareness for individuals, because I really think, similar to the article that you referenced, that having larger conversations about mental health is really truly the future of how we're going to be engaging our shift for the next 10 to 15 years. Now, when I start to have a conversation about mental health, before I go into the definition, I always ask people to write their own personal definition. So if you can, if who's willing to unmute their mic and share what they think mental health is, go ahead and you can just raise your hand and we can pull you up. But just in the chat, I am curious, what do you guys think your definition of mental health is? So I'll give you a couple seconds as you're typing really, really quickly and you're being awesome keyboard warriors tonight. What is your definition of mental health? When you hear that word being shared, what are you thinking about? So while people are typing, I'll read out some answers once I see some answers, because yes, I'm gonna have you engaged as well too. So Sasha might have to give me permission to share as well, right? So Pastor Henry not being in the madhouse, okay? All right, emotional, psychological, or social health. Let's keep the answers going. Anybody else? What are your definitions? And if you've never thought about a definition, just put in the chat, I've never really thought about the definition. And one of the reasons why I always ask people to have a working definition or share with me their definition is because most of the time when we're talking about mental health, people are talking out of context. They are talking about it from a perspective of societal's perceptions, and they're rarely talking about it from a working definition of it. So I say, Maria, I think of psychological breaks, right? And so for the most part, when most people are sharing their definitions, it's often tied to the negative, the not so good side, right? And I think what COVID has given us an opportunity is to realize that everybody's mental health is important. Not only the person who's struggling, but the persons who are just living everyday experiences. And we actually don't have a great framework concepts. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see. And I often, when I'm talking, having these conversations, I'm talking about it from a concept of how do we rethink our mental health. And so I want to talk briefly today about what mental health is and 3 components, and then go into that. And then we're going to have opportunity to ask questions. But as Sasha might have been going down the list, and you're like, what she's do again? Here's the list. And why I always put this as one of the slides for individuals to see is that everything that you see in there has a component of mental health. And we often, when we think about mental health, we're just often going into the mental health where I have the consultancy area. But all these other things, in order to lead marriage and family therapy, in order to be women's integrative wellness, I have to have a great understanding of people's mental health, their wellness factor. I have to have a great understanding of how their brain thinks. If you go into the wellness part, I have to have a good understanding of how athletes work, how systems work, how individuals work within teams, right? And so mental health is not just the biggest buzzword. Mental health has always been the word, but most people didn't know it existed because they only understood it from a level of crisis. So my story and why I take mental health a little bit more important and more serious than other people. Here you see I was a lovely 20-something plus years old. That is he was 4 weeks at that time, or could be a little bit younger because that's so far removed. And that was my husband, who passed away maybe like 3 or 4 weeks after this picture. So I was a 27-year-old with a 4-week-old baby having to figure out life because my husband had died of an asthma attack, right? And when I tell people, one of the things I always said, I happened to be working at a drug rehab at the time, so I had awesome support. And I remember walking into my mentor's office and saying, Jax, if I don't lose my mind in 6 months, I'm never losing my mind. And here we are 14 years later, almost 15 years in May, and I have not lost my mind as yet. Why? Because I had strategies. Why? Because I had information. Why? Because I was surrounded with people who understood the support and the necessity for support in my grief. So for a lot of people, I try to ask people to lessen the concept of mental health just being, oh, that's what everybody say in church, deal with mental health. You're at work, let's deal with your mental health. It's important. But it's important when you understand what it truly is, not important, not how you've been fed about it. So this is actually the World Health Organization's definition, and they talk about mental health as a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own ability, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now, if you can, Lajmi, tell me what you think about this definition. Did you even think that this was, like, is this real? Like, for some people, they don't even know that this is the definition, right? Write in the chat what your thoughts are about that definition. And I'll put it back up quickly in case anybody needs to read it again. A state of well-being in which individuals realize his or her own abilities and cope with normal stresses of life, work productively, and make a contribution to his or her community. So put your thoughts about that definition. Because I'm curious about how people kind of cement that conversation in their head when they're talking about it. So Sas says, what stands out? The normal stresses of life. Yes. In other words, there are stresses in life. There ain't no stress-free life. If you find out a recipe, somebody please come call me, come tell me. Anybody else? What stands out for you? Because as we're moving forward in this conversation, I want you to think about one, how you've addressed the concept of mental health before, and two, has that concept actually helped you or has it hindered you in your approach to actually improving or being aware of your mental health? I know we could be awesome keyboard warriors, y'all. This is why God got the camera on, right? You can have wellness while going through stressors. Absolutely, Maria. Where you're like, what? I didn't even know that existed. If you knew how stressful my day was today, yes, definitely. Right? Because I two-factor authenticating for everything that I do, know that somebody went into my PayPal account and spent some money that they shouldn't have spent. Yeah. But yeah, so wellness happens through stress. Anybody else? Anything that jumps out at you? And I'll tell you what jumps out at me in this conversation. Own ability. An individual realizing their own ability, because that's what mental health really is. A mental health skill is really finding out how capable you are to manage something as it is happening. And for a lot of people, when they're introduced to the concept of mental health, they're introduced as if they're incapable. They're incapable of managing their thoughts. They're incapable of managing their feelings. They're incapable of managing their relationships. And for me, I often ask people to kind of suspend that, because as we're growing up, we are going to learn depending on the individual who's around us. So I think we have one, when we know who we are and can comfortably be a productive person. Absolutely, passive. Right. So what I do is I take this definition and I walk a little bit further. So you get to see my transition. That's my little, and I got to add that because older. He's a whole man. So that's a whole. But I go into these components of mental health and I break it down into 3 areas: your cognition, your emotions, and your interactional relationships. And why I've taken the route of breaking this down is most people, when they think about mental health, are just thinking about what's wrong with somebody. And that has been the biggest misinformation that has been passed on to society for the very longest time. What I want you to consider is how you think about things, which is your cognition, how your brain works. So there's a push to have mental health change through brain health, and I fully endorse it, because I think that when people can think that they can do something to improve their brain functioning, they will actually make an effort. Then also the components of emotion. Sadly, most of us were never taught how to manage our emotions, and most of us don't have emotional literacy language. So therefore, being able to articulate it is so hard for most people. If I were to ask you in the chat, what's the top 4 emotions that people actually share? I know if y'all were really fast at being keyboard warriors, you would put good, fine, okay, and cool, which are not emotional, emotion-filled words. They don't fit on any emotional wheel. But I guarantee you, those are either the way you communicate with people. If you teach, if you have children, oh, I'm fine, I good, I okay. Those actually do not describe a feeling, by the way. Even though you may say that all the time, they never describe a feeling. So you never know how somebody's feeling, right? How many of you have felt good and underneath literally pissed off at somebody? And you're like, I'm good, but the aunt's going to Laura for a little bit more guidance, right? But you're not really good. And that good has to come with so many layers. You mean you good now, so you didn't have to let down somebody, but really underneath it, you're frustrated, you're angry, you're hurt, you're disappointed. And we rarely use those words, right? We rarely use those words to describe our relationship with ourselves and our relationship with other people. So I break mental health down into these other 3 components. Now, along with that, I talk about cognition from this perspective. And your mental health has a lot to do with how you focus, how you concentrate, how you have memory, how you make decisions, and how you manage stress exposures. And there are parts in the brain that are responsible for every single area of this. The brain just doesn't operate from a smart experience. There are neural links that actually cause the brain to focus better, cause the brain to concentrate better, to have better memory, to make better decisions and stress exposures. Then I talk about emotions on the flip side now, because as human beings, we store everything that has happened to us. And that impacts our mental health altogether. So you do not have mental health challenges, or you do not have good mental health without an awareness of what emotions are actually going on with your body. Talked about it a little bit before, but the emotional literacy bank and then emotional regulation, because we cannot regulate our emotions unless we have the words or the physiological behaviors to do that. So a good example of that when I get into the concept of emotions is to talk about children and the fact that we've labeled children's behavior like terrible 2s or terrible 3s, when really and truly that is an opportunity for parents to teach children how to emotionally regulate themselves. And so therefore then our language is that children are difficult and they're hard airs. And, I'm from Barbados, so that's our favorite word to call children, when really and truly the children have not had an opportunity to find words to verbalize how their bodies feel, because we move with our emotions first and then we have language that comes afterwards. And that's a big part of mental health that most people overlook. So you will have a big man who will experience extreme rage because when he was a little boy, he was never able to experience anger. And we'll walk around with, he's so angry. I always hear this. Why is this community so angry? Ask why this community was never able to regulate their emotions at 9 and 10. What else would they be? Right? And so ask people also then, when you're looking at mental health, to think about interactions. And the interactions are about your intrapersonal, so things that are happening within you. So if you cannot manage your own communication of your thoughts and your feelings between yourself and your body, and most people don't. Most people don't know the body parts. So therefore, you don't know how your gut, your stomach impacts your brain. You don't know the parts of the intestine. So you don't know how that particular intestine is impacted by food and how that food then actually goes up to the brain. So that's the intrapersonal. How do you communicate that with yourself? And then interpersonal, most mental health is determined, the kind of mental health is determined by the people who you are around. Now, a lot of people do not understand that as human beings, we co-regulate our nervous systems, which directly impact our mental well-being. And who you grew up with, the adults in your life that provided safe attachments or avoidant attachments, determine also how you perceive your mental health and how you actually interpersonally relate to them, whether or not you are, and there's this nervous system response, all of us have it, flight, fright, freeze, or fawn. And that's determined based on the individuals around you. That's not an internal response. That's a response to threat, and that's also a response to love. So I'm going to pause there with regards to just a brief introduction to mental health, and then I am going to turn it over to you, Sash.
Okay, so Janelle, you said a lot, and for our viewership, please feel free to comment, ask a question if there's something you need clarity on. I think this is, such a reflective topic, right? It gives us an opportunity, as you say, to think about some of the things we understood growing up. And so immediately I'm thinking of like some of the myths, children don't have mental health issues, or people with mental health are violent and unpredictable. So you immediately think of the white cold room and the jacket. People with mental health needs can't tolerate the stress of holding down a job.
Yeah.
But as you said, we always talk about it in terms of, these symptoms and these labels, depression and anxiety, etc. But we never talk about speaking about mental health in terms of brain health.
Yeah.
And the ways in which we can do preventative treatment to sustain our mental health. So you usually tell people, if you want to stay healthy, exercise, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. But we never hear about those suggestions or that advice growing up. And I thought what you said about mental health and us not being able to regulate our mental health issues unless we have markers to grade how we feel, unless we have that vocabulary to describe what we're actually feeling in a moment is so important. And so while I'm not seeing any comments at the moment, I guess my question is there another way of addressing mental health so that we're not always speaking about treating symptoms, that we're actually talking about preventative care and good mental health?
All right, so I like that question, and I think one of the easiest ways to make that switch again is to going back to the word brain health and really asking people to think about what they do, the behaviors they engage in, the food that they partake in, if that is actually brain love or if it's counterproductive to your brain. So if I think about my day, I had a relatively stressful day. And it started this morning around 5 o'clock, and it kind of continued, and it's just been, spiraling. And if I think about what I've had to eat, what I eat is not going to help my day feel any better. So when I get off here, I gotta make sure I go and eat something completely different that will kind of settle me. And so most people don't consider, that as an opportunity to think about how they want to improve their mental health. Another thing is that I want us to focus on the word health. Health is the absence of dis-ease. So if you're working on your mental health, you're working on keeping away particular challenges that can create dis-ease within the body. So most people also don't understand physical health. They're often thinking about physical dis-ease, but mental health and physical health go together because a good body has a good mind. Most people don't recognize that. So even if you can think well, but your body's not well, you're still not performing at optimal level. Just imagine if you took care of your body, where your body can get good oxygen, good blood flow, good circulation within the body, good cell movement within the body, good neural links within the body, how much more sharper you would be. So I always ask people, like, when we really get into a deeper conversation about mental health, and that's why, I've been a therapist all my life, and I really know going into the realm of mental health coaching, because people need information. They don't need crisis prevention. And when I say crisis prevention, I think that's what most people get. Something is happening and it's happening that's really detrimental to themselves or their relationships or their children. And then that's when they get information. And in that crisis information, you're still trying to prevent something, which is highly impossible. And crisis intervention is really survival. When you get out of crisis is when you actually get into understanding. And then understanding over a period of time is actually what then helps you to prevent any other things that happen. And if I were to add, another thing is then this part here. This is a emotional wheel. And if there's one thing you take away from this, have this. And this emotional wheel, I find like, if people were introduced to this early, and they were introduced to how to use it in relation to loss, because a lot of mental health challenges happens with people's inability to deal with loss, to be honest. Because we lose every day. I tell people we lose daily, we need to learn how to deal with it. It's not changing. You lose a tooth, you lose, if you're my age now, you get some gray hair, so you're losing your vitality. You know, if you're working in an environment, you're losing your capacity to actually be fruitful and being excited about the world, you know. But this tool is a simple tool, is the emotional wheel that I tell people, like, if you really knew this and you could articulate, your mental health could improve so much, because you would be able to speak how you felt about a situation. And for those who say, but nobody really want to hear what you're thinking, I never asked you to share it with people who wanted to hear it. I asked you to share it because that was important for you to articulate it. Because most people never truly share how they feel about a situation. And once you're not sharing how you feel, your body stores that information, and then it impacts your mental or your cognitive, and it impacts your mental or your emotional, how you exude emotions, and then it impacts how you repair. Because most people with mental health challenges or may be having mental decline, the number one thing is that they don't have great relationships with other people, nor they don't have good relationships with themselves. And the reality of it is we'll hurt every single day, but we also have to learn how to repair that hurt every single day, because that comes with the territory of being human. Your emotions are going to be in all sorts of circulatory experiences because we are emotion-filled people. You know, people use that word, I don't want to be emotional, but you're not a brick. Your emotions are supposed to direct your behaviors and your decision-making. And if you don't know how to regulate that, your emotions will take over your focus, your concentration, and your decision-making. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. And I like the one of the last statements you made in terms of not wanting to be emotional, right? Because as females, you know, you sit in a room or you're in a boardroom and you're there with your colleagues and you're making a very passionate statement. And somebody says, why are you being so emotional? Yeah. But even if you're not in a boardroom, when you look at the typology of women and men in the Caribbean, we tend to have people who, you know, going back to the definition of being able to cope with normal stress. We've just come out of COVID-19. That was major trauma for everybody. Yeah. But on top of COVID-19, we had persons who dealt with loss, who dealt with divorce, who dealt with abuse, who dealt with having to work on a laptop with 2 or 3 or 4 children in the background. Yeah. And we haven't been able to really address those types of stressors and trauma. And one of the statements we had made in the prep session was that women show up more, which makes them more susceptible to trauma and to things like dementia. And so I think it's so important us talking about needing intervention, well, no, not intervention, information, and being able to repair before we get to the point of intervention. Yeah. So I guess the next question then would be, you know, whether or not, well, I guess coming from COVID-19, does mental health always equate to depression and anxiety? And you kind of answered that question just now when you talk about brain health and being able to articulate emotions, etc. But where else is there a focus besides nutrition that can influence our brain health? I know you usually talk about the first, second, and third brains. So perhaps you can share a bit about that.
Yeah. So I think going back to the stats that you shared with the document that you shared at the beginning, you know, we have to be very careful when we are being led a road about social conditioning.
Yeah.
So we're being conditioned that 1 in 4 people get depression or 1 in 4 people get anxiety. But if you do the true math, it would mean 3 out of 4 people don't get depression and 3 out of 4 people don't get anxiety. So what are those 3 out of 4 people doing, right? And basically, I think what is that we can have a larger conversation about just how our needs are being met when we're taking care of our mental health, when we're taking care of our brain health. And 9 out of 10 times, our needs are not going to be met if everybody's not on the same definition and the same page. So what you see, and we had this conversation early in the prep, is mental health challenges being recognized later in life, but never given a role of mental health challenge. So dementia, Alzheimer's, if I say that word, most people would just say that that's the word. Yeah, this person got dementia, Alzheimer's, but that's in the same book as depression and anxiety. And I always tell people, when you actually don't deal with your mental well-being, as you get older, you're going to have cognitive decline and neurological disorders, which are called dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all of that stuff. So I think it's making the connection that when those things are happening, that's also about our brain health. And that's not just about depression or anxiety. And I don't know how many of you watch African movies, because I can't see faces, so I have to ask. And I'm going to ask you to be an awesome keyboard warrior. And if you do watch an African movie here or there, raise your hand or just put yes in the chat. And one of the interesting things about African movies is that African movies rarely talk about mental illness. You'll never hear them speak about a character having depression or anxiety because that's not their ideology in terms of their African culture. So the way how we speak about language as well too in our cultures determine the way in which we provide treatment or we provide information. And so we're coming from a very Western society view of there's something wrong when people are non-compliant with regards to behaviors. When I'm teaching about mental health and I'm teaching about group dynamics and I'm teaching the historical context, I drop in a word every now called drapetomania. And drapetomania was the diagnosis given to slaves who ran away from slavery. Now, even to say it to y'all sounds like complete madness in my head, right? But really and truly, there's a lot of systemic concepts that keep people appearing to be sick that really was a measurement of control. So when I'm having larger conversations about mental health, I really ask people to expand their concept of it and not necessarily fall prey or fall trap to the messaging and I will say the overbearing messaging that people are receiving, that 1 out of 4 people are coming down with some kind of mental health condition. And yet we're not focused on the fact that 3 out of 4 people are actually presenting completely different, which means that they may be taking care of their mental health and that we need to be curious about how they do take care of their mental health. What are they doing? What are the 3 out of 4 people who did not go mad? As Pastor Henry said, you know, going to the madhouse. And over the last two years, what are some of the things that these people do versus, you know, really focusing on making, in my opinion, making 1 out of 4 turn into 3 out of 4. And then us not being able to, we actually then pathologize the person who's well.
Oh, had a little fight there with the mute button. So then my question would be then, how do we work towards mental health in terms of how do I know if something is wrong with my mental health and that perhaps I need to do something or I need to see someone and not necessarily going full to intervention mode, but I feel like something has happened, you know. And I go back to women again because, it's what we do. Women sit in the table, something is wrong, and, we talk through it, we feel better, and then we think it's all resolved and we go about life. But if I sit alone and I'm starting to have what I perceive as thoughts that are not my usual happy thoughts, what do I do if I'm worried about my mental health?
I'll actually go past that and say there's always something wrong with your mental health.
Okay.
As there's always something wrong with your physical health. And I'll reframe it again. There's always a necessity to improve your mental health, and there's always a necessity to improve your physical health. Because as long as you're born, the aging process happens. And if we interrupt it as being something that's crisis, people will pay attention more. Now, I am seeing some names, so I am going to ask you again to be an awesome keyboard warrior. Don't worry, I'll never get tired of asking you whether or not you put one or two things in the chat. But I want you to recount, if we have women on here, how many women on here have challenges with their menstrual cycle? So yes, I'm in your business a little bit, and yes, I'm asking you to be a little bit vulnerable. So if you don't want to put in the chat, just raise your hand a little bit. I'm going to assume that for some of women in here that you have some challenges with your cycle. Maybe it's when you were growing up. Maybe it was as you got older. Maybe it was that you're getting into menopause now, and these hot flashes taking your life at night. But something as simple as a painful period is an indicative experience of mental health challenges. Why? Because hormones control our mental health and our nervous system. And so if you're having challenges within your womb, you're having challenges within your mind. I always tell women, when you've had bad periods, you have become an Academy Award winner, because most women who have bad periods end up going to work and pretending like everything's okay, right? Or you went to school and you acted like if nothing went wrong. And that actually plays a big role on the brain, right? Now you go to women who have children and have postpartum, or who have pregnancy loss or miscarriage. You have a hormonal deficit and a vitamin deficit that actually contributes to postpartum depression. Now, most people won't tell you that. They'll just say you get postpartum depression, but that's not what it is. Your gut health and your mineral contents and your vitamin contents are actually depleted because you are producing more of something for another human being, whether or not that child makes it or not. And so therefore you are deficient. And if you're deficient within your body, you're going to be deficient in your mind. So there's always something wrong with our mental health, if I had to frame it. There's always something that you can improve, right? And because there's always something that you can improve, what that allows people to do is stop pathologizing your mental health when it hits a peak. So I know many of you on here who may not want to admit it, get some severe moods, husband. I apologize, husbands. Pastors, I apologize, right? But the reality of it is that then impairs your mood, or that impairs your relationship. That is a mental health challenge. That's worth looking through, because you're not supposed to have painful periods. You're not supposed to be irritable and moody. You're not supposed to be anxious and heart palpitating. But if you don't know that those things are not supposed to happen, and you believe that they're rite of passages, you'll only address your mental health issues when it is too much. By the time it's too much, I always tell people, when you get into crisis with mental health, I'm telling you, individuals who are then going to be responsible for you will feel like if they don't care anything about you, but you would have been past the threshold of crisis. And so therefore, intervention is going to have to be more aggressive, more assertive, more targeted, and you're not going to like it because, well, these people not treating me kind. But like, if you're losing your mind and you're aggressive, people are not really going to be able to treat you as kind as you think they ought to, because they're going to try to protect you from harming yourself or protect you from harming other people. So I would challenge everybody to think that there's always something that I can do to improve my mental health every single day. If we had time, I will tell you that the mold in your house is also impacting your mental health. The clothing that you wear, the plastic bottle that you drink out of with BPA, and that those particles become endocrine disruptors, which are your hormones, which will impair your mental health. Like everything, the air that you breathe impairs your mental health. So it's not a case of, well, when do I move? You move every day to do something to improve your mental health. You just don't wait till it hits a crescendo, because if it hits a crescendo, and I always tell people, pain has entered your body 3 to 6 months before you feel the pain. So it's what do you do before? And we have to be, Dr. Diane Ammon, who is one of the leading psychiatrists in the world, says, you know, you have to have brain envy. You literally have to have brain envy, right? I read your message, Shakola. Girl, wave through them. It's all right. 1 minute, like Dr. J making sense. Next minute, Dr. J making sense. Man, I get off of this thing. That's quite all right. You are more than welcome to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think what she states is very important, and we may not know exactly what she's going through right now, but I want to encourage you, you know, and despite the moods, again, another thing we tell people is push through, fight through. But I just want to encourage you, because you actually used the wheel and you talked about being in one of those moods right now. She's feeling irritable. And that really is what we aim to do with this program, right? Build families one brick at a time, but also to encourage each other. And her statement about mental health is important, especially in grief, kind of segues through to our next session. So Shakola, if you can, give us 5 more. And if you can't, then so be it. But whatever you may be going through right now, I just want to encourage you. You know, I'm going to say the cliche, but you know, just cast your cares on him at this moment. And perhaps at the end of the program, if you're still there, we can just open up the mic so that you get an opportunity to say how you feel, and we can address it in more detail. Oh, okay, and so she did, right, Janelle? To me, right. So she did say what the issue is right now. And she is pushing through. And so we encourage you. And Janelle, we have so many soldiers like her, right? We talk about COVID-19 as a pandemic, but many people are walking around with grief, with experiences, with trauma. And a lot of us are showing up as the strong friend, you know, and a lot of times you have to tell people, check in on your strong friends, because those are the ones who are probably going through the worst battles and need your encouragement when you feel good. So beyond COVID, when people are doing life post-trauma, for example, like this, and Sikola, you don't know, but I am in the same boat as you and trying to do life. And Janelle, you know, as a friend was instrumental in helping me to walk through that. And I don't mean having conversations and hours of talking, but friends who are just there, who know to say, I am here when you're ready. Friends who may say, you may not need to talk right now, but I just want to encourage you today. So give us about 10 more minutes if you can. So Jay, you know, what advice would you give to people when they're trying to readjust post-trauma, post-COVID, post-loss, while they're going through grief?
I would just say that I go now to the definition of grief, and grief is a normal and natural reaction to any loss of any kind that creates change. So I ask people to take grief off of the pedestal that other people have put grief, because we lose often and we lose daily. I had a conversation with people, and people like, you know, oh my gosh, you lost your husband, how you can manage? I said, look, people lose their husbands every day. You just happen to know that he was mine, right? It's a case where we have created loss as one of these things that's untouchable and unspeakable. But in fact, all of us are in some level of, but let's just call it, trust me, a real blunt. But I had to tell people that, because, you know, they would make it about, you know, how could I manage, when it was like, well, how can I not manage? Because the reality, that was what my reality was. And so when we're having a conversation about grief, we often tiptoe around grief, right? It really is, you know, we tiptoe around grief, we tiptoe because we don't want to offend people. And I know everybody that's in grief don't want anybody to walk on eggshells around them, because what it reminds them about is that they're fragile. And nobody wants to feel fragile, right? Everybody wants to feel it if they can manage. And I always ask people to, you know, for a second, consider that grief is also something that physiologically impacts you.
Yeah.
So it changes your DNA. It changes, like I always tell people, like after my husband died, I had 51 million cavities in my mouth. I ended up having like an allergic reaction to nuts for almost 3 years that I could not make sense of. But that was my correlation to like him literally having an asthma attack and dropping down in front of me and like not being able to breathe. And that was like my psychosomatic came in. And like, so anytime anybody walked in with peanut butter, my chest would literally close up. So I think grief is one of these things that we have to give people permission ultimately to heal with action, and to understand that it does change your mental health. It changes the way in which you view things. It changes the way in which you think about things. It changes the way in which you respond to somebody else's embrace. It changes the way in which your biology, so even your lungs are impacted by grief. Your stomach is impacted by grief. Your head, I always used to remember telling people like, I had to relax because I literally have a pain that would shoot from here to here. And it would shoot from here to here all the way back down here, which is stressors, which is right now, it would be an opportunity for aneurysm to happen in my body. You know, and that's why people, when they lose a loved one that they're really close, next 2-3 days, you hear that the other person dead, because that person is their core regulation system. So I think, you know, it really does impact, and we don't have a larger conversations about it because we say things like time heals, the Lord will give you no more than you can bear, all of those things that at the end of the day, anybody who's experienced gonna have a real hard conversation, but God wants somebody to start saying those things, right? So it physiologically, it changes who you are. And it's just you call us hot. Yeah. So why wouldn't your pressure be high, right? Because now you're in an elevated state of stress, elevated start thinking, but we don't consider that. So then people will say, well, take these tablets, and you take these tablets for another 10 years and then your kidney's gone because these tablets gonna hurt your kidneys. Like, so when we start to, you know, we pay attention to the physiological expression of grief and how it actually gives you brain fog, lack of concentration, poor focus. Actually, there's something called a glymphatic system, which is the institutional fluid that wraps around your brain. And when you don't sleep, your glymphatic system becomes congested in your brain, and it impairs your mental health. It impairs the way you think. It impairs the way you love. It impairs the way you engage with other people, because you're not draining all the mucus and the inflammation and all the things that your neural circuits are not. And you can't, because you're also in a state of distress. So like, we do have to pay that, you know, it's more than just, well, somebody being crazy. Like, it's larger than that. Or this person taking too long to deal with this situation. There are layers, and these layers often get more sticky and convoluted when it's encountered by individuals who don't understand it, right? And they don't understand how to help, and they don't understand how to process, and they don't understand how to just be present, because all of us will experience grief. All of us will experience loss. There ain't none of us that coming out alive without it, right? It coming, lifing. So are you prepared when life lives? And even if you're not prepared, do you have the support? And do you know how to articulate the support? Going back to that emotional regulation, because our need for mental health is to be able to articulate the things that we need for better practice of mental health.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, Sekola, I just want to I want to encourage you, you know, she's really engaging in this conversation. Jay,
Thank you for being my awesome keyboard warrior.
that is fine. Keep typing. We are here, you know, in Romans, it tells us that the community of God's people is supposed to be the way in which God can minister his comfort and his peace to the brokenhearted. So this is your tribe tonight. This is your community. We are here. And Jay, again, I just want to thank you for the way in which we're discussing, you know, trauma and grief and mental health and the way in which all of those are interconnected, but not just that, in terms of having an open and honest discussion about it, but how we address what is called mental health. And as you said, recognizing the importance of brain health in the same way that we know we want to improve our physical bodies, you know. And so I like what you said in terms of doing something every day to improve your mental health, because every day we talk about, I need to go to the gym, or I need to walk a little bit more, I need to drink more water. And so, you know, we talk so much about the physical, and going back to what you said about a sound mind and a sound body, men's sana, corporate sana. How are we in 2023 with all our resolutions, going to start having open and honest discussions with ourselves about what the last 2 years have done to us, for us, with us, because some people actually came out of COVID much better than when they went in. And one of the things we did speak about on Saturday is the fact that COVID was perhaps a reset. For some people, COVID was that pause that a lot of us needed to address, you know, those different layers that you're talking about. So I'm going to pause and see if we have any questions. We did have a YouTube comment about menstruation, and it was the first time that this contributor was hearing that painful menstruation can be a sign of mental health challenges. And so she wants to thank us for the enlightenment. Someone else is saying on the chat, after losing my daughter, I've transitioned to seeing myself living without others. For me, when death does come, I would have passed the mourning stage already. I don't know if you want to speak to that or not, but I'll go back to what Sekola says about her pressure being impacted. You address that a bit, and then layers and waves. She talks about waves, I cry and laugh at the same time, and the remembrance, the memory.
I think most of the time when people are addressing or tying grief and mental health together and the outcome is not favorable, and when I use the language favorable, I mean in terms of that they haven't processed grief well, right? Because that's a skill set, huh? Mental health skills is a skill set. And like I said, none of us can get out alive, and none of us can get out alive without losing somebody. It just doesn't add up. That's part of our equation that's happening, right? But I have this concept where I ask people to have to decide, are you live, are you in your survival, are you living, or in your thriving consciousness when it comes to your mental well-being? Because all of us, when we have our own personal challenges, when they first appear, we will always be in survival mode, right? It's not going anywhere. So when I lost my husband, I immediately got into survival mode. How do I survive being a wife? How do I survive being a parent? You know, how do I survive being a therapist? All of that stuff, right? That was where I was at. But at the age of 30, I made a decision that I no longer wanted to survive, because when you're in survival mode, you kill your body. Right? Your body don't kill you, you kill your body, because you start to live a death life experience, right? And then I had to make a decision at 30 to live. And live, as much as it sounded beautiful, is also painful, because it means that you have to cope. You have to decide that you want to get up and brush your teeth. You gotta decide that you actually gotta want to eat. You gotta decide that you gotta go and speak to people. Like, I never lay down my bed. Like, you have to decide those to live. And then about 5 years after that, I decided that I wanted to thrive. I no longer wanted to live life on life's terms because life be life, and I want to also create my own terms.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things about mental health and grief. You have to have a vision for wanting to get better. If you do not have a vision for wanting to get better, you ain't ever gonna be better. People are gonna come and say, come, Sister Sasha, come, I think you need to cheer up. And when that person gone, you be like, she might as well not call me again. Like, once you've made that decision, there is not a kind word. There is not a good embrace that will matter. It always has to be your vision of how you want to improve your life. And I'll share this slide here. Because when I talk about this as a coach, I see myself as revolutionizing mental health and the field of mental health, because I think people have to think about it as a skill set that they have to improve versus as a problem they have to fix. There's nothing wrong with you. There's something that has happened to you that you don't have the awareness of how to engage with it differently. So where are you at? Are you surviving? Are you living? Are you thriving through your experience? So I am at the stage, I'm going to Shakola now, well, I made that blunt statement to the person who was at. I'm at the stage where if you find out that my husband died, this is 15 years old, your condolences do nothing for me. That is your social conditioning and training to say when you hear somebody has lost a loved one to say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry for your life. Are you? Because you don't know what I went through. So even if you start with sorry for your loss, the concept of it does nothing to soothe me, right? But I think we have to be, where are we intention? Because where you place your intention is where you place your attention. And if you don't have a vision for good mental health and your vision is always to try to survive the bad days, let me stop for a second and say to everybody that's on here, you have survived 100% of every bad day that's existed. You have 100% track record. Now it's going past the survival and making a decision if you want to actually have a track record of living, if you want to have a track record of understanding how to live life on life's terms, because life be lifing. And then you have to make a decision that if you want to thrive after all the situations that have come and will come. Because they ain't stopping. As long as you're human, and as long as you got blood, and as long as you got life, some mess can happen. There's going to be some messy person. There's going to be some messy experience. So I always ask people that in terms of mental health training, what's your intent? What's your attention? Where's it going? Now, I'm not saying that it won't be going to the place where there's darkness and there's a place of overwhelm and frustration. But if I go back to the wheel, you will realize that the wheel doesn't say there's something negative or positive. The wheel just says that these emotions exist. When a baby is crying, we don't say, you don't be angry in here. We say, well, like Christian want food. It becomes, and I always ask people to think about it that way. The concept of emotions start from the time we are born or even before, right? And we don't lose that sense, whether or not we keep or we don't have the baby. Like you can still feel emotions throughout in your experience. So I think we have to really pay attention to, what your attitude is. Where's your attitude coming? Because a lot of people do not understand this. People get better in mental health crisis and challenges when they have an awareness of gratitude and hope. That is how people get better. I would like to feel better. I've had enough. I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I can't live another day with this feeling in my head. This got changed. That's hope. And that's how people start to shift with their mental health, right? Because there's a sense of, well, I got to get out of here. I've been in here too long. And don't get me wrong. Sometimes you need to stay in that state long because you've loved long. You've loved hard. And I think that's what a lot of people miss. Like, because you've loved long and you've loved hard, it is an effort to get out of what feels messy and to improve your mental health. And it took me a while, to move from survival to living. and I'm grateful that I have people around me who understood it, who understood the assignment, as we would say, who understood, that, be gentle with, be in a space of awareness of, because that's really what we're all designed with, is to have awareness of each other's needs. And in the way that we cannot facilitate each other's needs, that we can actually reach out to somebody else who may be better at in helping people get their needs met, especially when it comes to his mental well-being.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jane. I mean, it's so much to digest. Pastor Henry says the concept of living instead of surviving is so Christian. To think that Jesus's mission on earth was to give us life, and not just everyday life, but an abundance of life. Too many of us survivors are missing his purpose in our mind, right? And I think that is very profound, something for us to think on. So for those of you who are on Zoom, please take a read of that again. Pastor Griffith says, he repeating some of the nuggets. Pastor Griffith, I'm with you, I wrote that down. We get better when we have an attitude of gratitude and hope. And where our intention is, we place our attention. So some really good nuggets for us to post. I want to go quickly to a question Sister Maria posted in the chat, and then we'll move on to the next segment. She asks if you could touch a bit on anxiety, because seniors seemingly are traumatized by the aging process, and anxiety robs them of their mental wellness.
Oh, I love that. So I am traumatized by the aging process, Maria. When I see a little gray hairs, but listen, I'm not ready for this transition. But what I ask people is to go a little bit further than using the word anxiety, and let's start using the word our nervous system, because that's where anxiousness stays in our body. And anxiety is not the problem. It's our inability to reset our nervous system that's really the problem. So as human beings, we are given the gift of managing or responding to an anxious state of being. That protects us, that creates awareness in us. So if we were being chased by a dog, a cat, a feral rat, we will be able to get up and run. And that energy, that adrenaline, the hormone, is what we need. But what happens is most people who are in a state of anxiousness or perpetual anxiousness do not know how to reset their parasympathetic nervous system. And so therefore you're consistently aroused, you're hypervigilant, you're hyper aroused. And that is why older people now are going to struggle with aging versus our grandparents before, because our grandparents will go and take a bath, drink some cooling tea, settle their nervous system. They go read the Bible, and they're going to a meditative state, a journal. Our older people now won't go and watch some Days of Our Lives online. You do some Scrabble at 10 o'clock, your melatonin is shot because they don't get up and they don't walk. So I ask people to kind of just reduce that word anxiety. We throw it around too much, and talk about nervous system regulation. And all of us, because we are aging, or we're living. So there are two concepts. You have to have healthy aging versus deadly aging, because when we start to see things like sagging skin, when we start to see creped skin, that's actually dehydration of the body. And so once you're dehydrated, you put the cells in overdrive. And so something as simple as drinking more water can actually reduce people's anxiety. Something as simple as having more oxygen and more greens in somebody's body can actually reduce the hypervigilance that's actually happening within the parasympathetic nervous system, and actually allow it to work better. Things like touch. A lot of our older generation have either resigned to the fact that they're not going to be in significant partnerships, so they don't have people who hug them and who hold them, or have a care for them. And when you don't do that, that actually impairs your nervous system. or creates a sense of loneliness within your nervous system. And by extension, that ages you and gives you more challenges, more irritability. You know, we get like that, nobody home by themselves, they're so miserable, but they're miserable because they don't have a co-regulation that's going to happen, and things like anxiety show up. So I encourage, I encourage people to, instead of just using the word anxiety, start using the word and go down the rabbit hole. Don't listen to everything I say as truth and gospel, you know. Go do your research. Look at sympathetic nervous system, the different systems within your nervous system, and see what are the things that you can do to improve your nervous system as you age, because really and truly, that's really what controls your mental health and your mental well-being. How well your nervous system is attached to your entire body, and how your gut helps upload and uptake information through food to your brain so it can function well. So yeah.
Please, if you have any questions, feel free, drop them in the chat. Jay, we're winding down. It's just about 8:37. So I want to ask one question about the third brain, the heart, before we go into what we can do as a community moving forward. You talk about regulating our heart space and self-care and rest. And I want you to talk a bit about what that really means and how it influences our brain health, our mental health. And Sister Maria says in the chat, you confirmed some of her thoughts. She was the one who asked the question, so thank you.
Okay.
Someone else says, very important message. I like how you're straight to the point, no sugarcoating. God bless you. So let's talk about the heart and the heart space.
All right. So most of us don't consider how our heart plays a role in our mental health. And I want to encourage people to think about how they feel when they're in love with somebody or something, and how that creates a sense of calmness, how it creates a sense of awareness, how it creates a sense of good decision-making and sometimes bad decision-making, but it does something to the way in which we view the world. And there's something called HeartMath coefficient, where the research talks about the more you are in regulatory system with other people, that will improve the way in which your heart beats, the way it pumps blood, and that's what controls. But believe it or not, even though our brains control a lot of things, without a heartbeat or our bodies to actually pump blood, we will no longer be existing. So you cannot be in resentment and guilt and have great mental health. I don't know who needed to hear that, but I can preach like for every single person. You can't hold a grudge as a consistent effort or sustainability with regards to human beings and have good mental health, right? I always tell people, and I don't mean it in a very bad way for anybody who has parents who are ailing, and, you know, it's a running joke in the Caribbean that the wicked people is who's get dementia, Alzheimer's. And it's not far off. Why? Because people who have poor instances of being able to show love will not have good thoughts running through their brain consistently. It will also mean that their nervous system will also be hypervigilant, because if you don't love, it means you don't trust. If you don't trust, it means that you're going to be on the defensive all the time. If you're on the defensive all the time, it means that you're consistently operating from a place of judgment, a place of lack, a place of stress, you know, and so it will impair the way in which your heart flows. There will be blockages because your body is not fully in control of fluidity and movement. You are angry, and I'm not saying that those things are not important, but those things are not sustainable for good mental health, right? And so when I'm talking about mental health, you see that people who are cared for better get better quickly. You know, people who are willing to walk a journey with people rather than saying, well, how long you can be in here? You know that I got things to do, you know? every day gonna come and visit you, well, that person's not really gonna get better quicker because they're already under pressure trying to get better, but now they actually don't feel as if somebody loved. They actually believe that they're burdened. So our heart health is important. And women, and this is said to scare many women on here who have cysts and fibroids. When you have cysts and fibroids, the number one organ that's impacted the most is your heart. Because the blood that really should be pumping through your heart goes to your womb. And there's a lot of research that talk about womb health is heart and love health. So you have a lot more women who have more physiological challenges in their womb because they're not experiencing authentic love. They don't have it coming from their family of origin, and they don't have it coming from their significant others. And then they're always trying to find a way to be loved that is not becoming of their own experience of their own bodies, right? So I think for me, it's, really to give people permission to start with their own experience of love, right? And most people don't understand how to love themselves. So in the event that you don't understand how to love yourself, is to understand how God loves you, till you believe that you're actually capable of being loved. And some people still struggle with that, but your heart health is so key in good mental health. But you got to do the things. You got to eat good for your heart. You got to talk good for your heart. You got to exercise. So exercise, the purpose of exercising is to improve cardiovascular endurance. It ain't to look snatch. It ain't to look got abs, boxy, and breasts. Those things are a side effect. The purpose of exercise is to move the blood through the heart so it can stay up for all the wonderful things that you were designed and created to do. But we do not take care of our hearts. We put our hearts under severe pressure. When you don't sleep, you do not take care of your heart because your body cannot reset. Your lungs cannot reset. Your digestive system cannot reset. Your lymphatic system cannot get all proper waste. You put your heart under tremendous amounts of conditions when you eat the foods that have MSG, that you feel the palpitations when you get up in the middle of the night and sweating, you're ignoring it. My heart, all right, but it's not. It's giving you signals. So your heart health is definitely important for your physical health, for your mental health.
Okay, I was just checking the chat to see if anybody had questions, queries, comments. Pastor Henry says long life is having good emotions toward others. And a lot of it rests on us. The Bible verse is, whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it.
Yeah.
So that's a perfect segue again. That discipline, it segues into what we can do or what interventions can our community. And I use the word tribe because in the CrossFit community, Janelle has the Fit Chick movement. She talks about having a tribe that will support you.
Yeah.
On your physical journey, but also having people who you can call on in your time of need. And so, Jay, I want us to consider what interventions can the tribe take to help themselves as a community. I would like to think that this is one of it, right? When you share information and you share knowledge and you don't keep it for yourself, you help someone else, you set off a light bulb, they then go and share the information. But what other ways can we help ourselves, help our peers in prioritizing our brain health in 2023 and our mental health moving forward? While you think of that, Pastor Griffith says, it does seem that we often fail to merge physical well-being and mental well-being. On YouTube, we see, Gloria, thank you for your contributions throughout the program. I have observed that since COVID, many people are depressed. Is depression considered an illness or chemical imbalance?
Oh, that's funny. Because the research before used to say chemical imbalance, and 6 months ago, research came back and said that they were actually reporting the wrong research, and it was really connected so people could sell drugs. So that's why I say you gotta be very careful. If you take the word depression and you just take the word depressed, and you strip it away for the layers that people's nervous system are very repressed and it's very heavy. That's how I like to look at it. I think what it talks about is overexertion of sadness as well too, and people incapable to move or to actually be productive. Now, I don't know if that's why more people have been diagnosed with depression during COVID, or the fact that those symptomologies fit the bill. I will tell you that the DSM-5 also moved from the depression being something that occurred between 6 months to a year to now 2 weeks. So if you go down the rabbit hole a little bit with me, now there's money to make if you can diagnose people with a low state of affect and mood for 2 weeks, which is very dangerous. I'll tell you how dangerous it is. I lost my best friend. She died September 2019, and her niece, she wasn't sick or anything, but of course she was sick because nobody dies suddenly. People die and they're sick, and we're just not aware that they're sick. And when their time is up, right? But her niece was in the hospital when she died, and she died at like 3:30 in the morning. And the next day, her niece went to a doctor. And she came to me and she said, Auntie J, I got some tablets because the doctor tell me I'm depressed. And she knows me very well. And she was like, but I know you could say completely different. I said, yes, because that's madness. How do you lose your aunt who's like your mother? You cannot sleep the night after watching her die and immediately somebody says you're depressed. Make it make sense. Now that was somebody who was a GP, obviously trying to do their best. But I think what has happened is that we have labeled grief depression. And it's not fair to people who actually want to work on their grief, who want to deal with the magnitude of their loss. Because loss is heavy. Loss takes a toll. I know what it is not wanting to get out of my bed. I know what it is would like to pull a cloak over my head and just lay down for 4 days. I know what it is to not wanting to brush teeth, go work, stay home. That didn't mean that I was depressed. It meant that I was dealing with my grief. And that was one of the ways in which I took care of myself until I moved from survival to living. So I think sometimes when we label people so quickly, and I'm not saying that people are not having the symptomology, but sometimes we have to honor the symptomology as a result or consequences of the magnitude of the loss. It's heavy. And when you love somebody, it's even heavier to walk this road without them. So you make a decision that it is possible and it will hurt even when you carry the load of loss. So for me, I'm very careful with how we use language to describe people's inexplainable or unimaginable experience of a loss that none of us can sink our brains into how it happened or how it occurred or how much lack of support people receive when they lost. And so I'm very wary of that. Is there increase? Of course, there's going to be an increase because we're given intention to it. And so therefore, wherever your intention goes, your attention goes. And so rather than saying, well, this person who's depressed, have they moved? Have they physically moved for the last 3 days? Well, if you haven't physically moved for the last 3 days, your thoughts are going to be stagnant. They ain't gonna away. Blood ain't gone away. Run through, but it hasn't changed the thought process. Have they eaten? Have they slept? If you haven't slept, your glymphatic substances within the body, it hasn't drained, so you're going to have stagnant thoughts. Like, we got to do a better job at breaking down those parts, those physiological parts, so people can get better outcomes, than just better labeling. We've done a really good job at labeling people. And people have honored their labels. But my question to anybody who honors their labels after you have that, then what? You know, what's the next step in being able either to rid the label or to manage the label? Because the label cannot be the only thing that provides you an opportunity to connect with people. And that's what we're kind of doing. We're labeling so people can connect, but you know, but then people connect and it's emotional gas station. And then when they go home, there's no greatness of growth. You know, it's just a lull. So you get back to the next emotional gas station. And I think that's a disservice to people being able to have a vision for better mental health.
So Gloria, I hope that answers your question. And to everybody else joining us on YouTube tonight, thank you so much. We do see you, we do hear you. So feel free to post your comments there as well. So we have about 10 minutes. And I already posed a question to you, Jay, on what interventions we can make, but I want to give someone an opportunity to just say something, ask a question. So, you know, Janelle can feel appreciated this evening. So Sekola, I don't know if you want to, because you've been our cheerleader tonight. I don't know if you want to express a sentiment, say something, you know, ask another question. If you don't, that's okay. But we want to give someone an opportunity, maybe 2 minutes, to say something on the discussion tonight. You can unmute your mic. I hope everybody's not sleeping. I don't know if they should raise their hands. Go ahead, Sekola.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening.
I just wanted to say I am learning a lot thus far. I think it's Pastor Griffith that said we tend to not merge physical health with mental health. And, you know, I find that so important. For me now, mentally, I think I'm in survival mode. It's like I'm just going with the flow, doing what you're supposed to do, but you're not really there. It's like you're not living, you're just existing. So I'm learning a lot. Thanks.
I want to thank you for being vulnerable before Jay comes in, because this program is intended to help people. So we need to give moments, right? Give those moments an opportunity to happen. And Sekola, you know, this is perhaps only the second time I'm publicly speaking about this. But like Janelle, you know, I've experienced significant grief within the last 2 years or so. I was diagnosed at the last moment at only 5 months of pregnancy with, oh my gosh, you know.
Preeclampsia.
Preeclampsia, severe preeclampsia. I was there like, what is it again? Severe preeclampsia. I had a lot happening. You know, I was in Barbados and they sent me straight to the hospital the day I went in for a regular checkup. And the next day they came and they said, you need to leave Barbados, otherwise you're not going to survive. And, you know, it was kind of like, well, leave Barbados and go where? Timbuktu, Hawaii, like, what are you telling me? And in those moments, having to make a decision to leave and go somewhere, anywhere, all you could do is put faith in God, right? And I usually say to people who are close to me, if not for God and if not for faith, I would probably have committed suicide. I would probably not have been here. If not for my tribe and my community, God knows what would have happened. So long story short, we ended up in Philadelphia, had surgery went well. And within a week, doctors were saying, you know, if you don't deliver, you are going to die. And I'm like, well, I've lived my life, you know, trying to be a martyr. No, the kids need an opportunity to live. They made the decision then that my life was the life they were going to try to save. I had 2 babies. One died a few days later. And so I understand what it means 7 months later or a year later to say, I'm still surviving. I'm still trying to make it one day at a time. I think I am finally at the point, and sometimes I question that, where I want to thrive again. I've only last week started back exercising. So I say all of that, Sekola, because it's okay to share the information and the knowledge, right? But we need people to understand that when we come on here, our intention is not just to have pretty conversation and move on. It is to impact life. And so 2 years from now, you might still be feeling that way, and it is okay. But Janelle is going to talk about interventions and surrounding yourself with people who understand the grieving process, who know when to speak or when not to speak, or when to just sit and be present, when not to push you, who will have patience with your journey. And I want to encourage you to have patience with yourself. Losing a child is not easy. And you can have everybody around you with the best of intention, but you feel like you are the loneliest person in the world. That is your process. We talked about layers and waves. So I just want to encourage you that, you know, God knows. I'm going to say the cliches because it's the cliches of Christianity and discipleship that brought me through it. And when I flung the Bible across the room, I remember telling Pastor Henry told me, read Job. And I was like, I opened it and I was reading a woman's Bible then. And the encouragement was what I needed, but I didn't want to hear it. And I flung the Bible and I was like, God, seriously? And then I read Job, and you get a new appreciation. So I'm saying all of this because I feel like this is a moment where we have to be vulnerable and we have to be committed to what this program is doing. And I want to encourage you that it will get better. I'm not going to say with time, because it may not be with time. Yeah. It might be in a space where you let out, you know, a bellow of a laugh because you remember something that happened, but it will get better when it needs to. In the meantime, you say you're in survival mode, keep surviving. Don't give up hope. Janelle is jcmayers.com. There is help. You know, we will find other resources that we can send through Pastor Griffith to you, so that at any point in time you feel like you need to talk to somebody, somebody's there waiting and listening. Janelle just posted her website in the chat. So Jay, I you know,
thank you so much.
To pray at the end of it, but I just want
to say, Pastor Henry, I want to publicly say thank you so much. I really appreciate you. He has been there for the entire journey. So, you know, there are days he would message, how are you today? I'm good. And then the next 2 minutes, Pastor, I'm not good. And I am crying and I am laughing. And I got the Bible verses as well. And it's like, God, why are you doing this? But it's a journey.
It is.
And I don't think anybody could walk the journey for you.
Yeah, exactly.
So someone said to me yesterday, why don't you join one of our groups where there are a whole lot of moms with losses? And you know, I said I don't mind, but for me, how I look at it is, after this session is over, you still have to deal with this. You know, so I tend to refrain from the group chats and all the nice comforting words, because it's going to come to an end and you still have to figure it out. So again, I appreciate it. Pastor Henry, thank you for the invite.
Thanks, Sekola. Yeah. All right, so I want to shift to the third. Let me go ahead. And I also put in the chat, Sasha, as well too, for anybody who's desirous of doing work, because that's where I kind of want to go to in terms of, you know, what do you do? What are the interventions, or what are the next steps if you want to daily improve your mental health? And I want to let everybody know that to work on your mental health is work. It ain't easy, right? It's not a walk in the park. For the amount of things that we as human beings have endured from birth to all now, is enough work and it's enough awareness. So I want to offer 3 concepts for people to think about. Set up the right environment. Your mental health is not going to improve if you do not have the correct environment. And something as simple that we take for granted as food, as water, as breath, as movement is your right environment. Now, anybody in here who has experienced grief, know that them 4 things we don't do. We don't eat right, we don't drink enough water, we don't breathe properly, and we do not move. And the more we do that, the more we spiral. And so I just want people to think about it, like, what's the one thing on this that I can do every single day that my brain can improve? Maybe you don't have resources for food, but you have resources just to drink good water. Maybe you don't have resources for water, but you have resources to sit and intentionally breathe. Then the next one is to find the right position. I know a lot of people may say, well, what is man doing? He consciousness me about this yoga or advocate. That's not what this is about. It's about finding the position that you know you can receive help, or you can put yourself in a better vision state for your mental health. So what is it that you need to be doing to improve your mental health today? What is it that not what somebody else has requested? Maybe it's that you have to get off of Instagram or social media. Maybe you need to get rid of somebody who's consistently holding you back from being better with the things that you want to do. But it has to start with self. You have to make a decision. Anytime that you cannot make a decision for your own mental health or your own challenge or your own crisis, somebody else is going to have to make that decision, and it's not the one that you want. Who's your immediate family? And maybe your immediate family are the people that are in this space right now. Maybe the people who you consider to share blood with have hurt you, have created more chaos in your life than you've ever wanted to experience, and you don't want to return. But know that finding the right position with the right people actually can improve your mental health by just being in that space, right? And I don't think a lot of people understand that. I think people really think when they're trying to have this concept of mental health that people are actually not going to be there. But people are there. People come into our lives for a reason. And then what's the position in terms of support? What does your support look like? Maybe it's getting new information. Some of you may have never come to any of these sessions before. And because of what the topic is, you're walking away with a good set of information that no, you need to go down the rabbit hole. I ain't Jesus and I ain't got the gospel, but I do have some information that may be useful for you if you move on and move through. And then focus on your capacity to breathe. And I tell people, I wake up every morning, and for the last 14 years, I have said, thank you, Lord, for waking me up this morning. Because I know what it is to see somebody drop down dead in front of me, literally. I know what it is. And life is very short. And it really happens like that. So think about how you are making the effort. I think that's one of the biggest toolkits. And sometimes we make the effort, but we do not have the capability. Sometimes we make the effort, but we do not have the emotional bandwidth. Sometimes we make the effort, but we do not have the correct tools. So effort also requires awareness. Then how are we performing? For the days that are hard, maybe that is all you can perform and do, and that's just by being. But there are also some days that you move past just being, and that your performance is to impact you. Maybe your performance is to impact people directly around you. And then also, how are you productive? Because one of the things that I've learned in being in this mental health field for the last 20 years is that when people do not have hope, when people do not have a vision, they will not improve their mental health. There will be nothing that will be productive. They will literally waste away at the situation that has occurred. So I ask you, how are you breathing into this productivity? You may not have the tools, and you may have to start. And when I say this, this is starting your toolkit. This is not the only tools, but if you concentrate on maybe one of each of these areas, your mental health may actually improve drastically. So you got to take the lead. Are you ready to lead in your own mental health? Not somebody else's, but yours.
Dr. Janelle Chase Mayers, everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed. We only went over by 6 minutes, Janelle. Didn't think we would make it, but we did, and that's fantastic. I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. I believe this is probably just part one of this session. If you want to know more, Janelle has posted her information in the chat. For those of you online, it is www.workwith.jayceyers.com/chaos to clarity. So we'll get that on YouTube as well. We want to thank each and every one of you for joining us for another episode of Real Talk Family Life. We really do hope that you learned something or two. We are definitely sure we impacted one life tonight. And again, Sekola, I can't thank you enough for your vulnerability tonight and sharing your circumstance. For those of you who may not have been able to share, that's okay too. We do hope that you've learned. We look forward to seeing you next week. I'm going to hand over to Pastor Henry so he can give the closing remarks. Thank you once again for joining us.
And they could put one word in the chat that describes their experience of tonight. Then as Pastor Henry is closing us up.
One
word in the chat
that describes this evening's
experience for them.
Yes. Pastor Henry, over to you.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Mayers. This has been a journey. This has been a journey, and we are so blessed to have you on our program this evening. We really appreciate it. And Dr. Sutherland, the reason why I sent you Job, experience help. Many years ago, when my wife of 22 years was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, I took her into bed one night and I just started to drive. I didn't know where I was going because I saw the end was coming, and I started to ask God some questions. How can you do this to me? What have I done? What has my wife done to you? Why have you? And I heard a voice in my head saying, my wife? That's what you call her? I thought it was my child that I loaned to you. And that changed my perspective on life altogether. So everything that I have today, everything that surrounds me, my children, whatever material things the Lord has given me, they belong to the Lord. And so when I lose things, I say the Lord gives, the Lord takes, the Lord takes. And like a Pentecostal preacher, praise be to the name of the Lord. And so, once it's the facts that you put in your brain, those that are settled there, that helps you to live and not survive. And so thank you very much, Dr. Mayers. You have opened up the scriptures to those of us who know it. We have opened it up in such a wonderful way to us. We are blessed of God. And we hope that you can favor us sometime again to be on our program. The link on YouTube is going to be there, so that share it with your friends and get the message out. And as Dr. Melissa shared her information, please contact her if you need to, and the Lord bless you. She's the professional. I am the practitioner. All right, so God is good, and thank you again, Dr. Sutherland, and all of you who have joined this evening. We want to thank you. Sister Robinson, the Lord bless you richly, and thank you again for sharing and participating, and all those of you who have shared and participated in the program this evening. Do have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful evening. The Lord bless you richly. See you in 2 weeks as we would have another program for you. Good night, everybody. Oh, the chat. I need to check the chat to see what you need to check the chat to see what is there.
Yes.
Wonderful, inspirational, informative and awesome, informative and uplifting, excellent, enlightening. Ah, lovely. Thank you so very much. Thank you so very much. God bless everyone. Have a good night.
You can stop the stream, Pastor Henry.
Yes, thank you.
Good night to those of you on YouTube. Ayana, thank you.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Asha.
Hi, Brother Georgie.
How are you doing?
Good, how are you?
Since last year, I've been spoken to see you.
Right?
I've been here
17 years